About Eugene Barge.
Yes, sir.
Well, he was murdered on his way to work. Unfortunately, he lived in Fulton County and worked in, well, he lived in what is considered Atlanta, and he worked in College Park. He was in uniform going to work. He come up on a situation in the curb on Rico Road where there was a truck in one lane for the traffic coming from the other direction. There was a truck parked in the road, sitting in the road. And there was a young lady laying out in his lane. And he stopped, opened his door, got out, and was shot from an area determined to be off the road in some bushes where they stepped out of some trees because the shotgun shells ejected there at a distance away from Officer Barge, and he was shot. He was shot twice. The third shot didn't go off, but the killer ejected the shell anyway for some reason, misfired, and then he pulled out a revolver, a 38 Taurus, and walked closer and shot Barge 3 times in the head and left the scene. Well, Eugene Barge's police chief was the first person on the scene because the first person that found Barge was a neighbor. He knew Barge, laying in the street dead. He calls the College Park Police Department. And Chief Sheets was Eugene Barge's, he was in charge of that department. He was the first person on the scene. Of course, he was run off by Atlanta police. They took over the investigation. But Police Chief Sheets told me that Eugene Barge was investigating Robert William Johnson. He told me Robert William Johnson was a Dixie Mafia hitman, and he was after him. I don't know if he was after him for killing somebody or if maybe, I don't know how William Johnson tied into the drug trafficking. Hateville, College Park, and another little town, all they're border up to the Atlanta airport. Their city borders, those 3 jurisdictions border the Atlanta airport. And they were turning a blind eye and getting paid handsomely to let drugs go through. But these are happy drugs, Quaaludes. I mean, it wasn't fentanyl. These were happy pills. Hippies were buying them like crazy. I mean, nobody was going to die from this stuff. Even the cocaine that went through, it was just recreational drugs. I'm gonna get paid 5 or 10, maybe 50,000. I don't know what they were getting paid, but they were turning a blind eye and letting the traffic flow. Barge didn't see it that way. As I was told, Barge was working undercover for Jimmy Carter.
And who, if you don't mind me asking, told you that?
A gentleman contacted me, and his father and Barge were very good friends, and he believes that his father revealed that to him. Nothing definite. Well, no. Barge didn't like it. He wanted to put a stop to it. His police chief, Sheets, S-H-E-E-T-S, Sheets, told me that he was investigating the very hitman that killed him, Robert William Johnson, the Dixie Mafia hitman. Going back to the Barge case, looking through the FBI files, there were 3 phone calls made the morning that Barge was murdered. 3 phone calls one to the police department in Atlanta, one to Hateville, and I don't know where the third went to, but there's 1,000 pages there you can see. These phone calls were witnesses saying, hey, I saw 3 white guys in a white van leave the murder scene of Eugene Barge. Now, normally when a passerby, a witness, a citizen sees something like that, they'll say, yeah, I saw 3 white guys in a white van jump in the van. They took off and they headed this direction. I didn't get their tag number, but there was some body damage on the front, or there was some this, that, and the other, something significant. They didn't give any significant details about something that a normal person might relay. You know what they told the police? I saw 3 white guys leaving in a white van the murder scene of Eugene Barge, and they're staying in room 218 at the hotel in Atlanta, the Atlanta Host Inn. How do they know where they're staying? What kind of witness gives that information?
Somebody who was in on it.
Somebody that wasn't in on it, but somebody that if they had tried to disrupt the apple cart, they would have been laying next to Barge. I believe that these were cops that were on the take, getting that extra money on a routine basis, turn a blind eye to let these trucks go through the Atlanta airport. They were wrong, but they didn't embrace murdering a police officer that was going to expose what they were doing. But 3 separate people called and said they're staying in room 218, and it turns out that's where they were staying.
They were separate people they called?
3 separate people called. A man, a woman, and I don't remember the details on the third. One called the Atlanta department, one called the Hateville department. I don't remember the details on where the third call came from. But when you have, I don't understand why the FBI didn't pick up on that. I mean, they recorded all this document and put it together in a file, but they were being given this information. Now, if a crooked cop had taken that phone call, you'd have never heard about it. But there was an honest cop picking up the phone, and he was told this information. Even though it's bizarre, he didn't bury it. Because, so when you read through these files, you're going to see some stuff that honest cops put in, and then you're going to see some stuff that crooked cops put in. So, to me, that right there spoke volumes that this was a cover-up. I started in this investigation after I retired from building houses. I said, I'm going to finally do this myself. I couldn't get anybody in the news media to even get interested in the case. Couldn't, from New York, Atlanta to New York, nobody was interested. In fact, the lead crime reporter for Channel 5 said, Charles, you just told me that Jerry Banks was found guilty in 2 trials and sentenced to die in the electric chair. Now, what makes you think I should believe you and spend X number of dollars based on what you think? Couldn't get any help from anybody. But in my very beginning, I was only focused on 2 people from my hometown, my area, the school teacher, Marvin King and Melanie in Hartsville. I investigated them. And in my investigation and in my writing of the book, I think that I did a pretty good job of proving that Jerry Banks was not only innocent, that he was framed. Now, a lot of people get accused of murder and sent to prison and sometimes maybe even die. Those are mistakes. But when you frame somebody, you're hiding something. But the other 4 was the police officer, the music producer, and the two people from Henry County, Marvin King and Melanie Hartsfield. I went to college. I don't say I went with Melanie. I went to the same college as Melanie Hartsfield. So I was aware that she had been murdered with a shotgun to the head with an older man. So, you know, I'm aware of the murders. When I heard a month later, that was November, in December, I think I heard that Jerry Banks, the young black man that found the bodies, was arrested. And I had a conversation with God, or either he had a conversation with me. I don't remember who was telling who what. But I knew at that point in time they were going to frame him and that he was innocent. And I just had a connection to him. And I've never been able to let it go. I was under the impression that they were murdered because they knew something that was going to blow the lid off Sheriff Jimmy Glass's drug industry, which he eventually went to prison for 10 to 15 years and served time. A couple of years, about 5 years after Jerry died. Maybe not that long. But anyway, I went back to the Sunday paper and looked at those 6 pictures again. And I said, what in the world would be the chances that the same group of people killed all 4 of the other victims outside of the serial killer? What if they were all murdered for the same reason? You got people like Carlos Later that was bringing drugs from South America to the Caribbean islands. He bought an island with an airstrip on it, and he would land a big, huge military surplus plane full of drugs. People in the southeast would fly down and pay pilots to come down with a briefcase full of money, get a load of drugs, a full tank of gas, one pilot, and with the amount of gas and the load of drugs, you could fly from this island just south of Atlanta, and you better have a place to land. And to do that, you had to pay a lot of sheriffs in South Georgia, or around Georgia. I've got an article where 7 sheriffs were arrested in a span of 2 or 3 days, all for allowing drugs to be flown into the area. Now, you had drug traffickers all over the country that would come down and pick up the drugs. It was their money in the suitcases. They would come down and pick up the drugs and disperse them. Now, if anybody was going to turn over the apple cart, you couldn't have regular cops going around and killing people that were going to upset the apple cart. Eugene Barge was going to upset the apple cart. They brought in the Dixie Mafia for enforcement, and they did the killing. Jerry was arrested. Well, on Thursday, the murders took place. Thursday around 2 o'clock. 2:30 exactly is when the gun had been heard going off. That's a Thursday. Friday morning, they went back out after the sun came up. Actually, they went out there at 4 o'clock in the morning with floodlights until the sun came up, searching for evidence. Couldn't find nothing from 4 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock. Officer Philip Howard, lead detective, shows up around 9 o'clock, and within 5 or 10 minutes he finds 2 shells, and another detective finds a 3rd shell. So there's 3 shells found at the murder scene November the 8th. those shells were sent directly to the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, documented. Now Sunday comes along 2 days later, and the story is the sheriff sends 2 officers out to Jerry's house and get his shotgun, and they test his shotgun on Sunday behind the courthouse. And the purpose is to take these shells and send them to the GBI and see if the shells from Jerry's gun match the evidence shells found immediately after the murders on Friday morning. And they did that. And this was November the 10th, was the Sunday that they said that they fired Jerry's shotgun for ballistics comparison. But they didn't send the shells to the Georgia Bureau of Investigations for a month later.
And in that time, I believe I heard the interview, the chain of custody was broken, I believe.
Well, we're going to go back to the chain of custody. There was never a chain of custody. But the thing is, the Sheriff's Department on Sunday, November the 10th, fires 3 rounds, biggest murder case in Henry County, and they fired Jerry Banks's gun, and they've got 3 rounds in their hand. Why did they wait a month to send them to the GBI to compare them? That's dead airspace, nothing happening, nothing going on. On Saturday, right after the murders, lead detective Philip Howard gets a call from somebody, and he hightails it to Florida. 3 white men in a white van that were seen leaving the Eugene Barge murder or abducted in Florida. Why does he need to go down there? He didn't bring them back. After investigating the Jerry Banks case of not killing Melanie Ann Hartsfield and Marvin King, they had arrested the 3 guys, suspects in the Eugene Barge murder, poured them over in Florida, extradited them back, and they were being held and questioned. GBI, Atlanta Police Department, FBI was involved, everybody, and they gave them lie detector tests, investigated this, that, and the other. It's all in the file over here. They failed 3 lie detectors. The FBI, now the FBI wasn't doing any investigative work. They were compiling the file based on what the Atlanta and the GBI brought them. They were doing the investigative work. And the FBI said that they failed the lie detector test, that they showed involvement, this, that, and the other. In fact, one even was said to be the trigger man, but he wasn't. But they lied detectors. They were involved. They were involved. They of course they failed the detectors. But the thing is, they test fired the 3 shells on November the 10th, Sunday, just a few days after the murder. And on December the 1st, if I'm not mistaken, the DA in Atlanta, Lewis Slayton, dropped all charges on the 3 white guys in the white van that failed the lie detector test and let them go. December 1st. December 2nd, Henry County Sheriff's Department, Jimmy Glass and Philip Howard, finally sends the shells to the GBI the next day.
It's almost like they're not trying to hide it.
They couldn't turn the shells in because they knew the 3 guys in Florida were guilty. And if they'd have gone ahead and turned in Jerry's 3 shells that they produced, how would it look for the GBI to say, yeah, Jerry's gun was used to kill Marvin King and Melanie Ann Hartsfield, and then have some honest cop in Atlanta or honest GBI agent really turn the screws on these 3 white guys in the white van and get them to confess that they did do it. Where would they stand then? You know, the rule book says you can only frame one person at a time. So before they could frame Jerry and send in those evidence shells, they had to make sure that they were going to get the Mafia off.
Brush them
first.
under the rug.
Now, what other murder case do you wait and sit on evidence shells in a double homicide for 30 days for no reason?
Do we know who those three men were?
He did. They were the Dixie Mafia.
And he never revealed their names or...
Yeah, he's a crooked cop. He didn't tell anybody. He didn't even make a deal of it, and the Henry County didn't even bring it up that he had gone down there to question these guys. He went down there to tell them to keep their mouth shut, and we'll get you out of this. They had to wait till the three guys were released, and then they sent the shells in, and they matched. Now, I have evidence in my podcast that Jimmy Glass's secretary dated Billy Payne for something like 7 years. It's on my podcast. Billy Payne admitted to her that he planted the shells. The sheriff gave him the shells. Friday morning, murders happened on Thursday night. Friday morning, about 8 o'clock in the morning, that's when they actually fired the shells behind the courthouse. It was never a firing on Sunday. They fired the shells from Jerry's gun Friday morning. Billy Payne says that he went out and dropped the shells on the ground per instructions from Jimmy Glass. An hour later, Philip Howard goes to the scene after they've been out there with 4 or 5 hours with floodlights and everything and couldn't find anything. Within 10 minutes after Philip Howard coming out there, and Billy Payne's already dropped the shell, Philip Howard finds 3 shells. So at that time, now at the time that I realized that Henry County waited 30 days, but only 1 day after the suspects in the Barge murder are released, that's when I knew the murders were connected. The GBI in 1974 was dirty. They covered up evidence that would have solved the Eugene Barge murder and the Henry County murders. There was evidence that this crew killed Eugene Barge and then came to Clayton County, Henry County, excuse me. They came down to Henry County and killed 2 people here. That's a mindset from 1974, and most of those officers are probably dead and buried by now. But I go to the GBI in 2016, 17, or 18, and I take evidence to the GBI today, and I show them that I've got evidence that the same people that killed Eugene Barge also killed Melanie Ann Hartsville and Marvin King. And I guess at some point in time, from 1974, at some point after, somebody in the GBI said, God, we got a lot of dirty people in here. We've got to clean this place up. And they did it quietly. Well, they're still doing it quietly, because I took evidence to the GBI agent Cynthia Atkins and gave her everything I had, documents and everything. And I gave her one document that showed that the murders of the people that killed Eugene Barge also killed the people in Henry County. When I requested the file on Eugene Barge's murder, the GBI sent me a document typed out a list of things that they found in their truck when they were arrested in Florida, a list of things that after they left the motel they threw into the dumpster, but the dumpster had already been taken to the dump. So they go out to the dump and they go through all this stuff that they know came from that hotel. And in that, if you look at the file from the GBI, there's a list of items. But Lisa Harris, who just retired after this incident, sent me a second document. And it's a handwritten document of the final document, where there's a police officer, could be Atlanta, could be GBI. He's sitting there writing down, and the other guys are digging this stuff out of the trash. A beer can, pair of shoes, white jockey shorts, pair of Levi's, another pair of Levi's, Lee brand, one Levi brand, one Lee brand, and they're just listing all this stuff they find. 9 Taurus pistols. He's writing all this stuff down. But when you look at the final GBI report, everything is itemized and listed. But when you look at handwritten, when it comes to the Levi's, 2 pair of Levi's, they got bloody clothes written in big letters and circled.
And they didn't put that in their report.
Huh? That did not go in the final. That did, and you won't find it in their final document. Now, I took that document to Agent Cynthia Atkins, and I thought I was in good company with an honest cop, and I showed her this document, and we both discussed that document. And I said, Miss Atkins, it's a proven fact that Eugene Barge was standing in the middle of the road by his truck, and the shotgun shells were 20, 30 feet somewhere off the road. He was shot at a distance. There was no blood splatter. They didn't go over there and pick the body up and move it. She said, no, it was a hit. That was a hit. They shot and killed him and drove off. And I said, let me tell you where that blood came from. They also came down to Henry County. The Henry County Sheriff's Department had abducted Melanie Ann Hartsfield from college, brought her across the Henry County line. She called Marvin King. Marvin King comes to rescue her. They don't let either one of them cross the Henry County line. They take them to the murder site and sit around for a couple hours for these yo-yos in Atlanta to come down and kill them. If you look at the murder scene of Melanie and Marvin, they were both shot in a dirt road, and you can see Melanie probably weighed 120, 30 pounds. She had bled out, and they drug her over 100 yards into a pine thicket to hide the bodies. You can see the blood smeared. Marvin King weighed 185 pounds, and his blood is not smeared. 2 people picked him up. They did not drag him off the road. Jerry Banks couldn't have picked him up by himself by any means, but he was picked up. And in order to pick up a man that has been shot in the back of the head, when you put your arms under his armpits and you do the lifting, you're going to get blood all over your clothes. And I told her that's where that blood came from. They wanted to make it think that they found murder shells at the murder scene on Friday morning, and they were already sent to the GBI. So they wanted some time distance, which is chain of custody violation. They lied in court in 2 trials. Dick Barnes, Detective Howard, and Paul Robbins, they said they fired the shotgun on Sunday, during 3 days later, to produce the evidence shells. But that never happened. that it just so happened that a county commissioner, Bud Kelly, found out that that was testimony in court, and he says, wait a minute. I was there when they fired the shotgun shells behind the courthouse. I don't work on Sunday. The courthouse is not open on Saturday or Sunday. I was there. It was Friday morning. Friday morning, around 8 o'clock, they fired 3 shells and took them out and dumped them and planted them. Those were the 3 shells that went to the GBI as evidence shells. At some other point in time, they had to take Jerry's gun and fire it 3 more times to produce the so-called shells, evidence shells. We'll never know when they really, but
They had a full month to do it.
yeah, they had a full month to do it. So there's no doubt in my mind that at that point you've got to show that Henry County was involved in the murders of Marvin King and Melanie in Hartsville. And the only way, you can't have a better way of taking the heat off of you is to frame an innocent black man. Now, like I said earlier, in my early investigation into my book and a little bit post afterwards investigation, I used to just pray to Melanie, ask God to let her speak to me. What did she see that was so frightful? Her high school teacher went to the funeral, went to the Hartsville home and spoke to her father, and her father told her high school teacher that Melanie had come to him a week before the murders and said she saw something, she's deathly afraid. And I thought she saw something that would upset Jimmy Glass's drug tracks. In my book, just a small article where a newspaper reporter from the Atlanta Journal asked Sheriff Jimmy Glass, we heard that Marvin King got into a fight with an unknown gentleman a week ago. And Jimmy Glass said, we've already looked into that. We've checked him out. He was out of town the day of the murder. What it was, that's what Melanie saw. That was the first attempt to kill Marvin and Melanie. That was the first attempt to assassinate them. But Marvin King lived, I guess, to die another day. Now, we're getting into an area where I have to be careful for libel. I have evidence to point to a person of interest that would have paid Jimmy Glass a pile of money, enough to spread around 3 crooked detectives, maybe even the DA in the courthouse, himself, and still have enough money to pay the Dixie Mafia to kill Marvin and Melanie.